Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. It's June 17th. Wow, we're like flying by in this year. I don't know about you, Andy, how you feel about
We
that, but
are.
wow,
We
wow,
are.
wow. Hello, everybody. My name is Leslie Godet, and I'm one of your co hosts here of CoachesCorner.health. I'm a mindset and emotional awareness coach. I work with mission driven women who perhaps want to add more value to their life. They already are doing something that they absolutely love, and I show them that it's possible because they really do not have to choose. And I love to be able to show them how to do that. My other part to what I love doing is, and I wanted to add this in today because it's really important to me, my mission. My mission is to empower women to fully love themselves so that they can develop deeper bonds with those they love. And so I do that through helping them develop an mindset so they learn how to manage their emotional moments when they get triggered, which allows them to protect their time so that they can get things done more efficiently and timely, keep doing what they love, pursue more, and add more value to their world, and still spend quality time with their loved ones. Andy, over to you.
Yeah. I love hearing that every time. And I'll say that many times. I'm Andy, the unconditional coach. I help people with boundaries, short and sweet, but I also help people create relationships, manage relationships, and I help people get what they want out of their lives.
Yeah.
That's what I do, and I do so by helping people mostly with boundaries. And it's interesting because a part of what I teach is the main topic of today's conversation.
Mm.
The two types of communication, the two forms of communication. See, this is an interesting topic for me because a lot of people don't understand that they communicate in two ways. I mean, a lot of people know academically that words are only a part of our conversations, but we don't know it as an experience. Like we don't actually feel it or do it. Um, so, and some people really don't like words. So, I love this topic of conversation. I love this topic we're going to dive into because it's a, like I said, it's one of the concepts behind what I teach in boundaries, but it's also important for people with or without boundaries. It's important to understand that some people communicate better by watching what you do instead of listening to what you say. And you'll see things all over the place that say things like actions are more important than words, or your actions don't match your words, or your integrity means you do what you say and you say what you do, and that sort of thing. Um, and although most of that is true on a surface and basic level, it doesn't really get to the root of the question. It really doesn't actually discuss what's actually going on, and that's why I thought this would be a great topic for us to discuss. On considering our recent string of conversations, this one really brings up a lot for us. I'm really looking forward to digging into it. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I really agree with you on that because I this is something that I never really fully, I mean, I knew obviously it is, like you said, academically, we understand that there is body language, there's things that we do, um, whether it's through how we are expressing our expressions or the actions that we're doing that can actually communicate how we're feeling. But I think most people focus on that words are the form of communication, and I think it's something that I've had to try to navigate, and we've talked about this, in my own
Mm-hmm.
relationship, and so I'm really excited to be digging into this too because I think there's something to be learned, really through conversation about how we communicate.
Yes.
It really does. It is a great conversation, I think, to be had because if you are someone who thinks that it's only verbally, where you're only verbally communicating, we want to just let you know that actually you aren't. So
There's
you are
more to it than
communicating
that, yeah.
two different ways. There's more to it. Yeah. So I'm excited about this conversation too.
Yeah, yeah. And the other side of the conversation too, there's plenty of people that find their partners or their coworkers or their friends use too many words. There's plenty of people that say, stop talking and just do something. In other words, they want to see your actions. They don't care about your words. My ex-wife used to say, you say you're sorry, but then you keep doing the thing you're sorry for. So my words don't match my actions. That's what she's trying to say, right? But what happens is she didn't want the words. She wanted to ignore the words. So some people actually don't want to communicate through words. Some people prefer to communicate through actions. And they'll make a bunch of assumptions, or will make a bunch of assumptions based on their actions, and completely disregard their words. So it goes both ways. There are people who do communicate best and think only about the words, and then there are people who completely ignore the words and think only about the actions. And we're here to tell you that both are relevant, both are important. We communicate through both methods, and most of us only focus on one of them. And I say most of us because plenty of us do actually understand and use both forms of communication. Just not all of us do it consciously.
Exactly.
So that's what I'm liking about this conversation. First of all, let's actually explain what we're talking about. So when I'm creating boundaries with somebody, I help them come up with at least two options for how to respond to somebody. One of those options would be verbally, a set of words. What words do you want to say when they do a thing? Either something you want or something you don't want. How do you want to respond? And what is a response that is an action based that doesn't require words? And that doesn't mean that you don't use words at all. It just means that the action you take might encourage the other person to then use their words. However, the action itself doesn't have words. Like, for example, if I did something that my wife would like, sometimes she would say thank you, and sometimes she would give up or come up and give me a kiss or a hug. One is an action, one is words. They both have the same effect, but depending on her mood and depending on my mood, they could have a different level of effect. Right? So, that's something that's on the positive side. And of course, on the negative side, if I did something she didn't like, she could say, look, I don't want you to do that, or please stop doing that. Or she could simply get up and leave the room, or make some sort of an action that indicated that she didn't appreciate what I was doing. So that's what I'm talking about. And it really, when we have the options of either words or actions, we can then choose which of those is most appropriate for me in the moment. If I'm losing control of my temper, maybe an action is better than words. If I'm losing control of my temper, maybe using my words allows me to keep control of my temper. Maybe using my actions allows me to do that, whichever is most appropriate for the moment. If I really feel like the person I'm talking to isn't hearing what I'm saying, then an action could disrupt that. And if they're not talking to me, then words could disrupt that. Right? So it's really about getting to the core of, there really is two ways to talk to somebody. There really is two ways to communicate. And communication is not just words, but it does include words. So that's what I'm getting at. And it's really been significant in my life when I've really observed the people that I'm interacting with and how they best respond. Do they best respond to my words, or do they best respond to my actions? And the short answer is there's no right answer, because they'll respond to words sometimes and actions other times. People don't just respond to one thing. Right? So yeah, that's been my experience, and it's really changed how I show up for clients. It really just changed how I show up in in my work, in relationships, in my friendships, socially, like even at a grocery store. I'll be talking to the teller, and we'll be having an intelligent conversation, and then a customer will come up behind me and want something, and rather than saying something to them, I'll simply do an action so that I'm not interrupting the conversation I'm having with the teller, right? So there's a number of ways we can respond, and it really has made a difference in my life. And I really do think that it's something that if we did it more consciously, we could have much more often the results we're looking for.
Yeah, I agree. And I think adding on to that, when you said about words and actions, that we are using these both as a form of communication, sometimes, and I think is, like I said, most people are thinking it's words, but the only time they talk about action is when they're not getting what they want. So they're saying that, well, your words aren't matching. You're saying something, but you're not doing it.
Yeah.
And so for me, I think that was very telling when we started having this conversation, you and I, because I never really had thought about it that way. So it was like a learning experience for me too. But I had never really thought about how we do sometimes request actions over words. I had not really thought about that, and that's another form of, the request is, you're communicating that you're requesting them to respond by doing something.
Yeah.
And that shows you, to me, then that's a form of communication. When they do what you've asked, they're communicating with you, and vice versa.
Or if they refuse to,
then that's another way of communicating with you. And so, yeah, I really like this conversation. So I'm just fixing up my thing here. I'm trying to get rid of the glare, but I don't know. It could just be I have to find glasses that kind of don't allow the glare from the computer. But yeah, I think, again, like I said, it's because I'm in this relationship, and I've been in a relationship for as long as I have. This is really kind of like a really good thing to know someone who does this type of work, because it gets me thinking, oh, okay, what can I do? What can I bring into like the thought process of, again, the words, the actions, being really more conscious around it. And being able to then see how can I influence the actions that I want or the words that I want, and vice versa. But so I thought it was kind of interesting when we started talking, and the other day, actually, it was just a couple of days ago, and we decided that this would be a really good topic to start really diving into a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, a lot of the times we do ask for actions. And I caught myself oftentimes asking for words, right? So we do both, right? Again, it's both are important, and a lot of times we specialize in one. Like we're good at one, we understand one way of communicating, we prefer one way of communicating, and oftentimes we get kind of pigeonholed into that way, and we really don't know or want to know really how to communicate a different way. And I find that it can be helpful to understand that the person you're talking with sometimes responds better to the way you're not familiar with, or the way that you don't practice as much. Sometimes they respond better because you don't practice it as much. It's more impactful because it isn't your normal form of communication. It's more impactful because it isn't their normal form of communication. And what I've discovered is that people who communicate verbally tend to marry people who communicate through actions. They tend to be in relationship together. They tend to partner up together. They tend to create things together. So understanding both ways helps you communicate with your partner, helps you communicate with your coworkers, it helps you communicate with just about anybody. And it does really significantly change how we respond. If you're asking me for something and you use your words and I'm, not responding, and then you choose an action that also supports those words, or that matches those words, or that somehow emulates those words, I can often say, oh, wait a minute. Now I hear what you were saying. Right? Now I understand the point you were trying to get across. Now I get it. And so even me, and I prefer words. I think you and I both do. This is why we get to talk a lot. This is why we can't stay under an hour. But even though I prefer words, sometimes actions are most appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Oh, and it's so funny how you brought that up, because I started thinking about how does this tie into another form of communication, which is like the five love languages.
Yes.
And this is kind of similar to that. And one person likes the verbal communication. I love to be able to communicate, and I am an open book. I like to talk. I like to share. The actions piece to me is just really, I think the way I look at it is I say something I'm going to do, and then the action follows to match what I said. So like you were saying, say what you mean and mean what you say, or do what you say you're going to do. That is definitely what I strive to be like. But I think it's just a whole other way to look at boundaries in how you communicate with boundaries. As an example, when we talked, it was about how do you respond to someone who you just don't feel is hearing you.
Yes.
And the response could be just getting up and leaving the room, because that sends a signal to the other person's brain that, oh, she's leaving or he's leaving.
Yeah.
So that may then prompt them to ask a question, which would then, I guess not so much trick their brain, but kind of like get their brain to start working in a different way, where it's no longer just I'm not speaking or I'm not hearing you, but rather it's like, well, why are you walking away?
Yeah.
Again, you still may run into that situation where they still can't explain it to you in a way that you understand. And so when you ask, they don't hear you. Again, it's better to, I found that it's just better to walk away from that and not discuss it any further until you both had time to think about it. And if you really want to go back and discuss it. But again, that is a form of communicating, like you were saying, which I never really, I understood that academically, like you were saying. I understood it was an action I was taking, but didn't really, I guess the form of communication that most people, either they choose, like you were saying, doing an action, or someone speaking words, whatever becomes your main way of communicating, you're probably not thinking that the other one actually has value, that you can use it. Right. So I thought that was brilliant, the discussion we had, because I often, because of the line of work I'm in, I usually I'm very easygoing, and it would take a lot to kind of send me over the edge to be upset or to raise my voice. But typically I can have a conversation with somebody who could be arguing on the other side, and I sound just like this. I can imagine being as calm like this is probably irritating to the other person, because they want to have, they're combative. So in that would then trigger a boundary of, a healthy boundary. Really, it's not meant to keep them away. It's just to say, you know what, I'm removing myself from the situation. This isn't going anywhere. We're not communicating. And so that helps to like just walk away from the situation and then look at it later when I've had time to think about it. Because I'm a big thinker, that. So
yeah. And what walking away does is it interrupts the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
The key part there, and this is something I learned in a lot of therapy and a lot of interaction with personally developed people who really know how to interact with other relationships, is walking away isn't enough. Walking away doesn't end the conversation. It simply disrupts it. And I don't care if you walk away for a day, a week, or a month, or a year. It still only disrupts the conversation. It doesn't end it. A lot of people, when they walk away from a conversation, are hoping the conversation ends, but it doesn't. I know a lot of us guys are famous for that. When our wives are our wives, and especially our coworkers are angry at us, and they're expressing that anger through passion, however they might do that. We tend to walk away hoping the conversation will end. But that isn't what happens. That is a form of communication. I'm communicating to you, I don't like this conversation. I don't like the direction this conversation has taken. It doesn't communicate. It does not communicate, I'm finished with this conversation. And even when you say, I'm finished with this conversation, I'm done, I won't have this conversation anymore, it still doesn't get that message across. Because until that other person feels like the conversation has finished, nothing you say and do is going to help them feel complete in the conversation. So that conversation is going to keep coming up. Even if that person doesn't bring it up again, it's still going to come up emotionally. It's still going to come up through actions. It's still going to be responded to. So these ways of communicating are important to understand. They're tools of communication. They're not ways to prevent communication. If you want to prevent communication, stop interacting with a person. Like, don't just leave. Stop sleeping with them. Stop living with them. Stop shopping with them. Stop eating with them. Like, just stop being there. If you want to stop interacting with a person, stop being in a relationship with them. Quit the job or get a divorce or whatever the thing is. Like, if you want to stop the conversation, that's how you do it. You got to quit the entire relationship. Now, I'm not recommending that course of action, of course. That's not what I'm suggesting, because I don't think conversations should be finalized without completion. But we do complete. What I'm getting at is we do participate in these conversations with our actions, even if we refuse to do so with our words. Our actions actually often have more to say than our words do. And when we're trying to participate in a conversation, or when we refuse to participate in a conversation, it's important to understand that what you're doing is speaking with more than words. And as a matter of fact, sometimes our actions, what they say, actions speak louder than words. And sometimes our angry actions say a lot more than any of our angry words ever could. When we're arguing and one of us gets up and leaves the room, that says a hell of a lot more than any amount of yelling and screaming can do. Right? Or another example, if I'm arguing with my wife and I hit her or she hits me, that says a hell of a lot more than any of the words could say. Right? When the argument gets into physical violence, that says a lot more than the words could ever say. Right? So actions do have consequences, and they are a form of communication. And so is the positive end. So is the good things. Like I said, when my wife would come up and give me a kiss, it would completely disrupt my day. I would absolutely change my mood into something positive. Even if it was already positive, it would become even more positive. And of course, if it was negative, that would just make everything go away. So the positive works just as well. A kiss or a hug. If you're having a bad day at work and you have a coworker you're very close to and they give you a hug, or they sit in your office with you, or they have a conversation with you, that can just mean so much. That can help so much, right? So those actions really can say as much as the words do. And for those people who prefer talking through actions, sometimes a simple word, thank you, or I love you, or you're doing a good job, is enough to change a person's life. Right? Just like a smile can change the direction of a person's life, so can a couple of simple words. It just depends on the situation, and each person is a little bit different, and each person reacts and responds a little bit different in every situation. So they can be powerful. Both forms of communications are important, and they're both powerful in different ways and at different times. And my goal is to help people recognize that both are useful, and that we can make use of both, and that if we're going to, and we always do use both. If you want to have the results you're looking for in your life, recognize that you're always using both, and become more conscious about how you're doing so.
Yeah. So I have a question about this. So it just came to me. I had not thought about it actually.
What do you mean we didn't
Like,
script this?
I know, who knew? But yeah, my question is this: what if you're still coming up butting heads? Meaning like you said, the conversation has just been tabled, but it hasn't been resolved to its completion so that you can move on. So, but what if you keep coming back to a similar conversation, meaning, and because you've tabled it so many times, this means not only have you tabled it, but you've revisited it and there's been no resolution, which could then create this, the emotional response being quite angry, resentful, fed up, done being a word. How would you manage that? Because I think that is something, especially when you are working, I think, with people who are trying to, one side is figuring that I need to either make this relationship work or I have to leave. And the other side may not even realize or probably thinks there's no problem at all. How do you, so if you're constantly butting heads on the same conversation, and maybe it's evolved over time, how would you coach someone around that? Because I think that really, I think, would be very helpful.
Yes. I actually just had a situation like this recently with a client. She, first of all, for her, it was her doctor. She was going to her doctor, and she has had some very, very traumatic experiences with doctors in the past who have caused serious physical harm with her. And they weren't listening to her, and they weren't paying attention to what she said and her symptoms and how she was talking about her what's going on. So they caused some serious harm, to the point where she couldn't walk for a number of years. So she had some serious trauma around these doctors. So she was going to this one doctor, and this one doctor had basically dismissed her and said he didn't believe her already on a previous appointment. So she was asking for support. I need to go to this doctor. I need to get some help. And she was on medical disability, and therefore she didn't have an option to, stop the relationship. She couldn't just get a divorce. That wasn't an option, because if she did that, she'd be homeless, right? Because he was in charge of her medical attention, and the medical attention determined whether or not she got medical or financial support. So she had to go see this doctor, and she had to figure out how to make friends with him in order to keep her financial support. And so what we talked about is, okay, well, your words haven't been working. His words have been directly harmful. So let's try a different way of doing things. Let's try showing up in a different way. Let's try actions that present yourself in a different way, because you can't control what he's doing and how he's responding, and whether or not he's going to be, enter expletive here, whether or not he's going to be some kind of a jerk. You can control how you show up, and how you show up will change how he shows up, even if he's a jerk. And 4 hours on the conversation on the phone with this lady, she still couldn't come up with a way that she could show up with this appointment and feel confident. And she even phoned me for a few minutes on the way to the appointment. And what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? She was in complete panic, like PTSD with these doctors, right? So, and it turned out that all she had to do was say, I'm happy to finally meet you in person, because her previous appointments were always on the phone. I'm happy to finally meet you in person. I'd really like to get to work together to get this dealt with. And although those were words, it wasn't the words that made the difference. It was the actions of how she presented herself. It was the body language, the tone of voice, the non-verbal stuff that really changed the appointment. And it turned out she got exactly what she was looking for. She felt heard. She felt cared for. She felt like he was on her side. And this doctor, his reviews are chock full of people who think he's a jerk, who don't like him, who think he's one of the worst doctors in the organization. And she managed to get what she needs out of him because she was able to change how she shows up, how she presented herself. It's the same thing in relationships. When we butt heads, when we continually go after conversations again and again and again and again and again, the way I help people is by helping them look at the way they've been communicating and try and find a way to communicate the other way. If you've been communicating by responding in anger and yelling and screaming, then maybe try communicating through changing your actions. If you've been communicating by downing a half bottle of booze or walking away and never being around the person and just never being at home when they're at home and waiting for them to go to sleep before you do anything, that if that's what you're doing, then maybe try staying sober for a little while and having a conversation. Try something different. Consciously understand what you've been doing and consciously try something different. Not just, well, that didn't work, let's try something else, but actually consciously try the other path. And if that doesn't work, go back to the first path. But be conscious of both your actions and your words. And what I have found every single time is the more a person can be conscious of both their actions and their words, the much more quickly their conflicts resolve. Because at any given moment, the person you're talking to will respond to one or the other, but they won't necessarily respond to the one you hope or think they're going to respond to. You're going to respond to something different. So that's what I would do when we're butting heads and having continual conversations. The first step is make sure that you go into those conversations on purpose. Don't just accidentally bring it up one day. Say to your partner, I want to schedule an appointment with you for Wednesday at 3 p.m. or, Friday at 7 p.m. We're going to have a date, but it's not going to be a friendly date. It's going to be we're going to finish this conversation date. And do that. It doesn't necessarily have to be that formal, but it shouldn't be spontaneous. It should be planned so that they can prepare as well as you can prepare. Like you said, you like to think about things. What I'll say is that almost everybody does. They just won't necessarily tell themselves that. They won't acknowledge it. So giving ourselves that time and space to prepare for it allows us to be ready. And don't make it too far in the future, because then we're just going to spin and spin and spin in our heads and get all anxious. And by the time the event happens, it'll be, out of control. So, 1 or 2 days, or depending on how emotionally charged it is, maybe a few hours from now or a couple of hours from now, right? I want to have a conversation with you. Can we talk at 6 p.m. this evening? Right? Something like that. And not, we got to talk. The famous words.
Famous words, yeah. We got to talk. Because usually, unfortunately, when you say those words, the person's automatically going into defense mode because, right? What's up? That is, they're starting to think, what did I do wrong? It's usually deflected back at them that way. So, no, I love how you answered that question. I think it's important too, because we can have ourselves spinning in our head over and over again about how we feel about something. And one of the things that I do, which is, and anyone can feel free to use this, but I've done this for, like I said, I've been married 26 years. And what I've done over the course of our marriage is when I have a disagreement with my husband that I I don't like something that he said, or I don't like something that he's done, I will actually have a conversation when he's not present. And so I can get it all off of my chest, get it all out, because that will then leave me with from at a place where I've actually started to think about really what it is that's bothering me, and help me to be more proactive in engaging in a conversation that's not accusatory, that's not blaming, because I think that people, the words part, the words part of the communication matters a lot, because how, not only what you say, but how you say it is extremely important. And so really understanding what you're saying, just as another form of communication is written. And I find that there's times where if you're not consciously aware, what you've written may not most times even translate to somebody else the way you're thinking and feeling. So it's best really to, read through what you've written, make sure it's what you want to say before you press send, so that it's not coming across as, again, accusatory, blaming, whatever that looks like. But I like that what you were saying, because it can, especially with somebody who has dealt with or is dealing with a post-traumatic stress disorder, event in their life, where they are anxious all the time based on an experience, and their experience doesn't necessarily have to be that that's what it's going to be with the next person that they meet, but because of all of their other experiences, that's how they go into any new experience, regardless of whether they've even interacted. And if they've interacted if there's one negative interaction, it could be just a misunderstanding of words, a misunderstanding of intent. And when you
and a misunderstanding of tone.
Right. And if you could take that moment to just have this, even have a brief conversation with yourself. I like to do it. I just think it makes me feel better, because then I'm not approaching the conversation later with my finger pointing and all of that. So, but I think that was really good for your clients. And I know that you might have felt in the moment of those hours of talking that it wasn't really what she didn't get any resolution from that. But I think really what that did was it helped let her get it off her chest. She released it all. So by the time, she's calling you on the way in, that's the last part of it, the tail end of all of that. So that when she went in, she'd made that decision. You know what? She finally realized something clicked, where you had that, like, let's reframe. Let's go into this conversation with a different tone, different intent, just a different style of communicating than coming in already defensive before you even get into the conversation, because you can actually change the trajectory of your interaction by just changing your own words, your own actions. And so just being conscious of that. So I think that was really brilliant, even though in the moment you might not have felt that she received, but she did, because
obviously she did.
Because you did end up saying that there was a better outcome from that. So I think it really makes a lot of sense. And here's another thing for you to ponder on. One of my clients that I'm working with right now, we had a conversation. We talk twice monthly as part of our agreement, face to face. And we talked about where she's at. I'm really proud and super grateful that she's actually taken the time to put in the work for herself, because the work is from within, and that's how you communicate, from within. Like, work on self, and that helps you communicate better, both actions and words. But one of the things she brought up, which was interesting to me, which I guess I must have felt it at some point, but the word gratitude, she said, I'm hearing this word gratitude from you, but I'm wondering, what is this gratitude? And she says, I never really got it, but then I did. And I think that
Right.
was because we've been doing the work together. We've been very, like closely working, because in the beginning stages, I'm like, right, not on them, but I'm like closely working with my clients to make sure that they're getting what they need, so that I can then start taking baby steps back away, so that I can release them to start walking on their own and doing their own thing, because that's the ultimate goal, right?
Yes.
But I felt it was really good when she finally said, I finally got it. That gratitude, especially, I think it probably hit home when we started talking about where her life was at right now, like the changes in her family's life, the changes that they had to go through, just like the location, the kids in their schooling, all of the stuff. And I
Yeah.
said to her, and then she started sharing with me how they were making the ends meet and all of the stuff that was happening. And I said, well, you do know that you found a way, right? And I think when I started pointing out to her, if you start looking at all of the things that are happening to make it happen, even though you've changed, things have changed, but you're still making things happen to support yourself, to have food on the table, to have a roof over your head, for your kids to get educated. When you start looking at those things differently, then you start realizing, oh, this actual change is not so bad. But then she started
Right.
realizing, oh, I can find gratitude in anything. And I
Yeah.
think that was a way of me communicating with her, just a simple word, but it's more than just a word, because
Yes.
gratitude is really a feeling.
Yes.
And that feeling then will help her with her thoughts and her
Yes.
actions, right?
Yes.
So yeah, it was just really interesting. I wanted to bring that up because I just thought it was brilliant when she told me how her life went from not finding gratitude in anything and blaming everyone for her life circumstances, including her past, to like, oh, this past is part of me, but it doesn't define who I am. And oh my gosh, look at all these things that are great that are happening for me. And it's bringing me and my family closer together, creating those deeper
Yeah.
bonds, which is, like I said, my mission in life is to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I completely agree. And it helped me to, what you just said helped me to really solidify a point I've been kind of beating around a little bit lately and haven't really been able to articulate properly. But what you just said helped me really put it into words. When we're trying to communicate, what we're actually attempting to do is we're trying to connect hearts. We're trying to help my heart give something or present something to your heart, and I'm trying to receive what your heart is presenting to me. Now we have the limited capacity of tools in our words, and we support that by the much vaster toolbox of our actions. But the problem is we don't know how to interpret those words and actions the same way all the time. When I do an action, it means something different two different times I do it. When I say words, they can mean something different each time I say them. So we don't have really effective tools to communicate those hearts to each other, because hearts don't have words. Hearts just have emotions. Hearts have feelings. It's really difficult to communicate those feelings with words and with actions. And this is why I think the combination of the two is really, really important, because when we understand the collaboration between the words and the actions, we can really start to get a picture of where the heart's actually at. And most conflict happens because we interpret what their heart is saying, and we make some assumptions and some guesses as to what we think their heart is trying to say. I'll go back to my clients for a moment. That first call that she had with her doctor, he said something like, I don't understand what you're saying. When you describe your symptoms, I don't understand what you're saying. But he said it in a tone that indicated much more like, I don't understand what you're saying. In other words, she interpreted it as, I don't believe you, you're lying to me. Clearly what you're saying can't be true. And what what he wasn't saying is, I'm confused, I'd like to know more. And then when she got into the appointment, it turned out that he's from a culture that tone means, I'm confused and I want to know more. But in North America, it means, I don't believe you. So that tone of voice changed everything for her. It turns out that he really was confused and wanted to know more. This is why he asked her to come visit her physically, so that he could physically see what she was talking about. And it made all the difference. But that tone that she had for so long assumed was just going to be, he doesn't believe me, he doesn't believe me, he doesn't believe me, he's going to want to send me to a mental hospital for my physical problems. You know, she was just stressed right out. And this is why the more conscious we can become about using both words and actions to connect heart to heart. And I don't mean heart to heart simply in your romantic relationships. I mean heart to heart between a doctor and a patient. I mean heart to heart between a coworker and yourself. I mean heart to heart between the person in the grocery store. You know, I mean heart to heart. Whenever, every single time we're trying to communicate, when we, Leslie and I, are trying to communicate with you, our audience, we're trying to present what's on our heart to you in your heart. What we're trying to present to what we feel, what we experience, what we understand on an emotional level. We're trying to present those things. And we have the limited toolbox of our words and our actions. So we're doing our best to try and communicate those things. All of us do it. And the more conscious we can about using those tools, the more conscious we become using those tools, the more effective of communicators we become.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, it's amazing too when you just said cultural, because that is a whole other animal to add to the mix, because
Yes.
Again, multicultural or melting pot, with Canada and the US, which is where we're coming to you from, is, in North America. And I know that when it comes to cultural differences, that again, how do people speak to each other? There was, as an example, the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, I believe it was. I watch it. Okay, I'm admitting. But one of the interesting conversations that the ladies had was around how I believe she's Chinese, who lives in Utah, and her husband is Chinese. So the way that their family would interact at a dinner table, they would resolve conflict even at a dinner table. So even if the discussion got heated, that's how they discuss things. But when she brings that out into, like mainstream society and interacting with other groups of people, whether it's Black women, white women, other Asian cultures, whatever that looks like, the way she grew up, and the words and actions, how they communicate, might not translate well to other people. So then you have to learn how do I manage that? That I think would be very cool for you to maybe even start putting into your toolbox, because really, I'm sure you're going to come across people who are, again, like even myself. My husband is white. Now he's also French. So there's a difference in how, and he's also from Atlantic Canada, which is a different type of culture even in Canada. Yes. And so, and then how I grew up in Toronto, and like everybody's everybody. It's like, it's like a melting pot, like you said. And, although there's different cultures, it's like the way I think it's kind of funny. I think you talked about this a few episodes back, or maybe it was last week, how we talked about how there is so much diversity in North America, but in Canada, specifically, we're just looking at like, oh yeah, okay, everybody's welcome. And it's like, you're not, whatever you do, you do. And there's no like, well, I mean, there are small pockets where people do point out different things that people do that they might not like. But for the most part, it's like, oh, that's where you're from. Oh, that's where you're from. You know, it's like there's no like divide like there is, I've found more in the States, but that just comes from their history of like, you know, having to go through all of the civil rights movement and everything, you know, that happened in the States. But it's just interesting when I start thinking about that, how with culturally in Canada, I've always found it, I've accepted other people in how they communicate, whether it's verbally or with actions. And if I don't like it, then I'll just say I don't like it. But I don't feel any sort of way.
Right.
Whereas in when I was living in the States, I would find sometimes I would feel some sort of way based on a different cultural interaction. So it's interesting.
Well, and like I said, that was the specific interaction with this particular doctor, is that what he was trying to say, what he was trying to communicate, what his heart was trying to get across to her is that I care what's going on, and I would like to see you so that we can actually address this problem. But the tone of voice that he used in that one phrase comes across to her as, I don't believe you. Right. So even when we're talking culturally, what means one thing to one person can mean something completely different to another person. And we can be talking white redneck to white redneck, and their histories are different. We can be talking, you know, Atlantic Canada to Atlantic Canada. We could be talking Toronto to Toronto, and they're still different, right? We could be talking in the States. We could be talking Alabama to Alabama. We could be talking two white people right to each other, and they're still going to have misinterpretations. They're still going to have what I would call cultural interpretations to those words, although they don't necessarily think of them as cultural. What I'm getting at is, if you want to find a happier life, become happier, get what you want more out of life, the assumptions we have about body language, tone, and words are less useful and more damaging if we just run on those assumptions. Now, we have to make those assumptions because we can't ask for clarification on every single word that's said. However, and so we do have to have assumptions. However, if we find there's a conflict, if we find there's something, maybe you said something I didn't understand, or I said something that offended you, ask about the intention. Get some clarification about the intention before we jump to conclusions about what they meant to do. Ask about the intention and pay attention again to the body language, to the words, to the tone, to the actions, and especially when there's conflict, ask for clarification. When you get a positive result, reinforce that through some sort of an action, through some sort of words. Say, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. They might still think that they might still make some assumptions that the wrong thing was the right thing to do. That, you know, really what it was that you liked was the hug, but what they gave you, what they thought they were giving you was the kiss. But what you actually liked was the body on body touching of a hug. And so saying thank you for that will reinforce it, but they might still not get it right. So, however, with the positive ones, it's less important to ask for clarification. It's with the negative ones. If you want to resolve conflict, ask for clarification of what their intentions are. And pay attention. Because a lot of time when we ask for clarifications, we're angry and we shut off anyway. But pay attention to what they say. The actions and the words really make a difference. Culturally, personally, emotionally. All you have to do is interact with a baby, and you can see emotions at their most core. And they're just wonderful.
Yeah. I actually was thinking as you were speaking that because we table our discussions when we do have those actions where we walk away, or you just don't resolve it. Maybe you even just in words say, okay, I agree, or you just give in and the conversation comes up again, is ask yourself if you want a different outcome. And if you do, how willing are you to approach it differently? Because going into a conversation, like you said, if you don't understand something because someone said or did something, and maybe you didn't like it, but you're not certain, you just ask, but make sure how you're asking isn't coming across as accusatory, but rather with curiosity. Because I think when it comes across as curiosity, like, why did you do that? Or I don't understand what you mean. Could you tell me what you mean by what you said? And that might be just the way for them to help them to reframe what they meant. Meaning they're like, oh, you don't understand. Okay. And if they still, I mean, this is just learning. It's learning to communicate. Yeah, communicating isn't easy, and relationships aren't easy. And this goes for all relationships, friendships, families.
And you might be married for
coworkers.
26 years and still have to learn how to communicate.
And still learn and still keep learning, because as we get older, we change. We get influenced by external sources, and we bring those opinions and those thoughts and beliefs into our home, and not necessarily did we have them before, but we learn basically because we are taking in whatever we're taking in. So that's partly too, I think. I mean, we could really extend this conversation, because a lot of that could be how, other things externally influence how we show up, right?
Yeah. You mean we could extend this past an hour again?
Oh my gosh, we could probably go for another hour. But yeah, no, I've enjoyed this conversation. And like I said, I think we could come back to that at a later date. I think as we look at what we want to do going forward. But yeah, I feel like we touched on a few things, and really, I think, explained the reason why it's important to be, I think really the most important thing around communicating is to pay attention. Be aware, like how you are, your body language. Be aware, like if you're saying something, but your body language is communicating something different, then maybe think about how you are, like if you're like this and you're calmly saying something, that you can't be calmly saying something and you have your arms crossed and it shows that I just don't want you to be here. You're basically shutting someone out. But then again, on the flip side, if you're just comfortable and you're leaning back, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're shutting the person out. It's just learning to become self-aware around emotions, becoming self-aware around body language, becoming, being more of an active listener so you can understand the words being spoken. And if you need to table, like as Andy had said, to table a conversation, again, it's not going to end the conversation, because in the other person's mind and probably your own, the conversation is not over because it didn't end. But you've walked away from it. You have the opportunity to decide if you want to take it back up and how, but being intentional about, again, like you were saying, timing is important. So let's create that space. Don't just spring it upon me, because again, those types of conversations, especially when they're serious, if you just spring it upon someone again and they're not in the right place to respond, you're probably still going to get the same butting of heads, right?
Yeah, I agree. The number one reason why we butt heads is because we don't have an appropriate time and space to continue the conversation. We just spring it on each other.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Thank you, everybody, for watching this particular episode, for helping us dig into this topic. And, of course, let us know what your thoughts are, if there's more that you want to talk about, if you have questions. We want to know. You can talk to us through our email, or, of course, you can comment on the videos. We'd really like that. Like and share and subscribe to our channel if you want more of these conversations. We have plenty more of them to see, and we will have even more coming. Thank you for listening. Thank you for paying attention. Thank you for sticking around for this hour. we really do enjoy these conversations, and we really want to help. We're here for you guys. We're here for our audience. So thank you very much, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Yep. We'll see you next Friday. Have a great weekend and a fantastic week.
Bye,
Bye for
everybody.
now.